The officers believed their setup was foolproof. They had planted evidence, bribed the judge, and thought they had sealed Samantha's fate. But what they didn't realize was that their target wasn't just anyone. She was someone with the power to unravel their web of lies. When the truth began to emerge, the justice system itself shook to its core, and those who sought to oppress found themselves on the defensive. What unfolded next defied expectations, leaving even the sharpest minds in shock. Under the glow of the city's neon signs, Samantha Williams emerged from a modest grocery store, clutching a bag with bread and milk. The night air was cool, and although the day had been grueling, her thoughts lingered on the battles ahead. As a civil rights lawyer, her work was never easy, but she had always been ready to stand her ground. Suddenly, two police cruisers swerved onto the sidewalk, blocking her path. The car doors flung open, and three officers stepped out, two in uniform and one in plain clothes. Their leader, Sergeant Paul Henderson, was a face Samantha knew all too well. His reputation was steeped in cases of excessive force and corruption. "Hands where I can see them," Henderson commanded, his voice sharp as he advanced toward her. "What's the problem, Sergeant?" Samantha asked, keeping her voice calm though her pulse raced. Panic was not an option. "We have credible information tying you to narcotics distribution," he replied, his tone void of emotion. "That's absurd, and you know it," she began to counter. But before she could finish, one of the other officers reached into her jacket pocket. "Well, look at this," the officer sneered, withdrawing a small bag filled with white powder. His smug grin was as staged as the evidence he held. The street fell eerily quiet. A few bystanders had already started recording the encounter on their phones. "This is a setup!" Samantha's voice was unwavering. "And you know it. You can save your excuses for the station," Henderson responded dismissively. He grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back, as he secured the handcuffs with a brutal snap. "Record this!" Samantha called out to the growing crowd. But before she could say more, she was shoved forward, her head slamming against the hood of the cruiser. "Shut it!" Henderson hissed through gritted teeth. The second officer smirked as he stepped closer. "Think your legal jargon's gonna help you now, Miss Williams? It won't. I'm an attorney. I know my rights," she retorted, her voice steely. "Congrats," the officer mocked. "But tonight, your rights don't mean a thing." The crowd's murmurs turned into shouts of outrage. "This is wrong," someone yelled. Another voice added, "We saw them plant that on her." "Back off," an officer barked, raising his baton. The onlookers took a cautious step back, but kept their phones aimed at the unfolding scene. Samantha was shoved into the back seat of the patrol car. The doors slammed shut, and Henderson climbed into the driver's seat. "You've been a thorn in our side for too long, Miss Williams," he said with a sinister chuckle. "Time for payback." As the car sped through the city streets, Samantha stared out at the passing lights. Her mind raced. They had pulled her into a dirty game, but she was determined not to lose. Upon arrival at the precinct, Samantha was thrown into a dingy cell. The cold, gray concrete walls were oppressive, and the handcuffs had been left on. A deliberate act of cruelty. Her rights were blatantly ignored. No phone call, no access to legal representation. But Samantha knew her assistant, Darius Miller, wouldn't rest until he found her. Hours later, she was dragged into an interrogation room. Henderson was there, along with Detective Bryant, his loyal accomplice. "You need to sign this," Henderson said, sliding a confession across the table. Samantha's gaze locked onto his, unwavering. "Even if I were foolish enough to sign this, your lies wouldn't hold up in court." Bryant leaned in, his smirk widening. "Don't be so sure. Judge Lander's already in our corner. He's delivered the right rulings for us before." Samantha's heart sank. Lander was infamous for his corrupt dealings and his allegiance to law enforcement. "The trial's tomorrow," Henderson stated smugly. "If you want to avoid the harshest sentence, I suggest you cooperate." Samantha's expression turned icy. "When the truth comes out, you'll regret this." Bryant laughed. "You're in over your head, lady. Don't forget who runs this city." The next morning, Samantha was led into a courtroom. Judge Lander sat at the bench, his fingers tapping impatiently on the desk. Darius was already waiting, armed with evidence. "Your Honor," Darius began confidently. "We have footage proving the evidence was planted. Witnesses confirm standard procedure wasn't followed. We demand Samantha Williams's immediate release." Lander didn't even glance at him. "Motion denied. The defendant will remain in custody without bail." Samantha's fists clenched. The system was playing out exactly as Henderson and his cronies had planned. "This is a blatant miscarriage of justice," Darius argued. "One more outburst, and I'll have you removed," Lander snapped, his tone icy. As Samantha was escorted back to her cell, Henderson passed her with a smirk. "Welcome to reality, Miss Williams." But they had underestimated her resolve. Sitting in the cold, dark cell, Samantha began to strategize. They had rigged the system against her, but she wasn't about to surrender. The authorities urged the public to remain calm, insisting that the justice system would handle the matter fairly. But by evening, the situation was spiraling out of control. Outside the courthouse, hundreds of demonstrators gathered, holding signs that read, "Free Samantha Williams" and "End Police Corruption." The crowd swelled as chants for justice echoed through the night, demanding accountability from those in power. Amidst the growing unrest, an unexpected event unfolded inside the police precinct. Eric Donovan, a young rookie officer, sat in the dimly lit break room, his eyes glued to the news. He couldn't shake the memory of the night Samantha was arrested. He had witnessed Henderson plant the drugs in her pocket, and now the weight of his silence was unbearable. His hands trembled as he realized the magnitude of his complicity. Late that night, Donovan mustered the courage to act. He picked up his phone and dialed Darius Miller's number, his voice shaky but resolute. "I need to talk. I was there that night. I saw what happened. I can prove Samantha's innocent." Darius froze, momentarily stunned. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. The next morning, Donovan stepped into the public eye. Standing before a crowd of reporters, cameras flashing and microphones thrust toward him, he confessed everything. "The evidence was fake," he stated, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. "Henderson planted it, and Judge Lander was fully aware." The press conference sent shockwaves through the city. The police scrambled to contain the growing scandal, but it was too late. The prosecutor's office launched a formal investigation, and calls for Samantha's immediate release grew deafening. The system, once thought unshakable, was cracking under the weight of its corruption. The only question was, how far would those in power go to protect themselves? Inside the packed courtroom, the tension was palpable. Journalists, activists, and concerned citizens filled every seat, waiting for what promised to be a pivotal hearing. Samantha was led in from her holding cell. Her expression was calm, yet her eyes burned with determination. She understood the stakes. This day would shape not only her future, but also the fight for justice in the city. At the bench sat Federal Judge Ann Harris, a sharp departure from her predecessor. Known for her unwavering integrity, Harris replaced Lander after the scandal became too glaring to ignore. As she banged her gavel, the room fell silent. "We are here today to review the case of Samantha Williams," Harris began, her tone resolute. "Prosecution, are you prepared to present your evidence?" Darius rose from his seat, his voice clear and unwavering. "Your Honor, we have undeniable proof that the arrest was a setup. Video footage shows the drugs being planted, and Officer Donovan has provided a sworn testimony confirming the conspiracy." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs of shock and outrage, forcing Judge Harris to strike her gavel again. "Order in the court!" she demanded. The prosecutors, clearly cornered, attempted to stall. They claimed the evidence needed further review, but Judge Harris wasn't one to entertain such games. "I'm issuing a directive," she announced sternly. "Sergeant Paul Henderson and Judge Lander are to appear in this court immediately to testify." As if on cue, the courtroom doors swung open, and Henderson entered, flanked by federal agents. He was already in handcuffs, his face flushed with anger. "This is a joke!" he shouted. But Judge Harris silenced him with a sharp glare. "You will speak only when granted permission," she stated coldly. When Donovan took the stand, his testimony was damning. He recounted in detail how Henderson orchestrated the evidence planting, and how Judge Lander received bribes to deliver favorable rulings. His voice quavered at moments, but his resolve was unshakable. "I thought I had no choice," Donovan admitted. His gaze lowered. "But I can't stay silent anymore." The courtroom erupted with gasps and whispers, and Judge Harris called for a recess to deliberate. Outside, the nation collectively held its breath, waiting for the verdict. 2 hours later, Samantha was brought back into the courtroom. The air was thick with anticipation as Judge Harris delivered her decision. "Miss Williams, after reviewing the evidence and testimony presented, all charges against you are dismissed. You are free to go." The room exploded in cheers and applause. Strangers hugged, tears streamed down faces, and chants of "Justice for Samantha" reverberated throughout the building. Yet for Samantha, this was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was immense. Henderson, Lander, and their accomplices were arrested and placed under investigation. Public outcry forced the government to begin a comprehensive reform of both the police force and the judiciary. Standing before a sea of reporters, Samantha addressed the nation. "This is not just my victory. It's a victory for every person who has fought for fairness and accountability. We've cracked one part of this corrupt system, but the fight is far from over." Her voice was steady, her determination unyielding. The battle for justice had gained new momentum, and Samantha Williams was at the forefront, ready to lead the charge.